The silence in a professional studio isn't empty. It's heavy. It presses against your eardrums like deep water. Right now, the only sound is the high-pitched whine of the capacitor charging and the rush of my own blood in my ears. My throat is sandpaper dry. Across the room, Arya stands behind the tripod, her face hidden, her posture rigid. The lens looks like the barrel of a gun from this angle. I made a joke about this. I made a stupid, defensive joke about stepping in front of her camera. And now, the shutter is about to click. I realized too late that letting a perfectionist truly see you is the most dangerous thing you can do. To understand why my hands are shaking, you have to understand the architecture of the distance between us. I'm not supposed to be the subject. I'm the one who tapes down the cables. I'm the one who makes sure the coffee is exactly 180 degrees. I'm the invisible architecture that holds Arya's world together. When I moved here from a town where the biggest landmark was a grain silo, I thought the city would eat me alive. It tried. But then I found this job. Studio assistant to Arya Vance. In the art world, that name opens doors, but it also shuts people down. Arya doesn't take photos. She dissects reality. She speaks in Kelvin temperatures and f-stops. She looks at a person and sees the geometry of their bone structure, not their soul. Or at least, that's what I told myself to feel safe. For 2 years, I've been the shadow to her light. I wear black because it doesn't reflect. I move quietly because sound ruins the vibe. I learned to anticipate her needs before she even knew she had them. A specific lens, a fresh memory card, a bottle of sparkling water with the cap already loosened. We had a rhythm, a perfect, frictionless machine. The studio itself is a sterile beast. It smells of ozone from the strobe lights and that distinct, sharp scent of expensive electronics. The white cyclorama, that curved infinity wall at the back, is terrifying in its emptiness. It's a void waiting to be filled. The hum of the hard drive arrays is the soundtrack of my life. It's a constant, low-level vibration that settles in your teeth. I've watched dozens of models step onto that white floor. I've watched them shrink under Arya's gaze. She doesn't yell. She doesn't have to. She just stares, silent and calculating, waiting for the light to hit the exact millimeter of skin that makes the image work. I always pitied them. I stood in the dark corners, safe behind the monitor array, checking focus peaks and histograms. I was the observer, the witness. It was safe back there. I could admire Arya's focus, the way her brow furrowed when the shadows were too blocked up, the way she moved with this predatory grace around the set, without ever risking anything. I could be the small-town girl with the messy feelings and the imposter syndrome, as long as I kept it tucked away behind a clipboard and a roll of gaffer tape. I've seen her scrap an entire day's shoot because the emotion in the model's eyes didn't match the texture of the fabric. "It's dishonest," she would say, deleting the files without blinking. Dishonesty is the only sin in Arya's church. That's why I liked my role. I could be honest about my function. Serve the image, don't be the image. I built a fortress out of my competence, making myself indispensable so I wouldn't have to be interesting. There is a safety in being essential but invisible. You get to watch the fire without getting burned. But proximity is a tricky thing. You spend 12 hours a day, 6 days a week with someone, breathing the same recycled air, watching the way they drink their tea, learning the cadence of their silence. You start to think you know the boundaries. You start to think the walls are made of concrete, when really, they're just glass. I thought if I just kept the cables organized and the schedule tight, she would never look at me and see the mess underneath. I was wrong. The architecture of distance we built was sturdy, but it turns out it only takes one loose brick to bring the whole thing down. And that brick was a cancellation call on a rainy Friday evening. The inciting incident didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived with the tinny, apologetic voice of a booking agent on speakerphone. It was 5:45 p.m. on a Friday. Outside, the city was dissolving into a gray slurry of sleet and brake lights. But inside the studio, the air had gone brittle. The model, an ethereal, angular woman Arya had spent weeks scouting, had booked a conflicting campaign in Milan. She was gone. The gallery series deadline was Tuesday. The logistics were a house of cards, and the wind had just blown. Arya didn't scream. I almost wished she would. Screaming is messy, but it releases pressure. Instead, she went completely still. She stood by the window, her reflection in the glass looking like a ghost against the darkening skyline. The silence in the studio stretched so tight, I thought it might actually snap one of the light stands. I could hear the hum of the mini fridge in the corner. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. She was vibrating with unspent creative energy, a tiger pacing a cage that had suddenly shrunk. I went into damage control mode. I started listing alternatives, pulling up digital composites on the iPad, scrolling through agency rosters with a desperate sort of speed. "We could call Sarah," I suggested, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. "Or maybe try to pull a favor with Elite?" "No," Arya said. Her voice was flat, clipped. "They're too polished, too trained. I need something that looks like it's unraveling. I need exhaustion. I need the feeling of being trapped in a room with yourself for too long." She turned away from the window, her eyes scanning the empty studio with a look of cold fury. I was tired. It had been a 60-hour week. My hair was pulled back in a messy knot that was slowly giving up the ghost. I was wearing an oversized thrift store sweater that had seen better days, and jeans that were more comfort than style. I felt small and unpolished next to the sleek, high-end equipment surrounding us. I just wanted to break the tension. I wanted to make her huff that small, reluctant laugh she sometimes gave when I was being ridiculous. It was a defense mechanism. If I could make her laugh, the storm would pass. "Well," I said, leaning against the grip cart and gesturing vaguely at my own disheveled state, "if you need someone who looks like they're unraveling and hasn't slept in a decade, I'm right here. I'm pretty sure I'm the poster child for existential exhaustion right now. I'll give you Trapped in a Room for free." I waited for the eye roll. I waited for the dismissive wave of her hand that would send us back to the casting files. It didn't come. Arya stopped pacing. Her boots made a sharp scuff on the concrete as she pivoted. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just looked at me. And I don't mean she looked at me the way you look at a person you've been working with for 2 years. She didn't look at her assistant. She cataloged me. The air in the room seemed to vanish. She took a step closer, then another. Her eyes, usually dark and guarded, were suddenly wide, pupils blown, scanning my face with a terrifying intensity. It felt physical. It felt like she was reaching out and touching the skin of my face with her gaze. "Turn your head," she commanded. Her voice had dropped. It wasn't the administrative tone she used for emails. It was the voice she used when she had a camera in her hand. The voice that made models do things they didn't know they could do. My body obeyed before my brain could catch up. I turned my head to the left, exposing the line of my throat. My pulse was hammering against the skin there, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. I knew she could see it. She stepped into my personal space, close enough that I could smell her. Sandalwood and that crisp, clean scent of rain. She reached out, her hand hovering inches from my face. She didn't touch me, but the heat radiating from her palm felt like a brand against my cheek. She traced the air around my jawline, down to my collarbone, which was peeking out from the stretched neck of my sweater. "The light hits you differently than I thought," she murmured, almost to herself. "You hide it. You wear these baggy clothes and you hunch your shoulders, but the structure is there. Aria, I croaked. My voice was a wreck. I was joking. She finally looked me in the eyes. The connection was electric. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was something sharper. It was the look of an artist who just found the missing pigment for a masterpiece. I'm not, she said. You're right. You're exactly what I need. You're not performing exhaustion. You're living it. And you have this guard up, this desperate need to be invisible. She tilted her head, studying me. I want to photograph the moment that guard drops. I'm not a model, I argued, panic rising in my chest. I freeze up. I blink. I hate being looked at. That's the point, she countered. I don't want a model. I want you. The weight of that sentence hung in the air. I want you. She walked back to her desk, the decision already made. The energy in the room shifting from frustration to a focused, laser-like intent. Sunday morning, 10 o'clock. Come alone, no makeup. Wear that sweater. Or something simpler. We're going to strip this down. I stood there, paralyzed by the grip card, my heart still racing against my ribs. The joke had landed wrong. Or maybe, for the first time in my life, it had landed exactly right. The weekend stretched out before me not as a break, but as a countdown. Saturday passed in a blur of nervous energy. My apartment, usually my sanctuary, felt like a waiting room. I paced the small living room, reorganizing my bookshelf 3 times, checking my phone every 5 minutes, and trying to convince myself that this was just work. It was just a shoot. I had managed hundreds of shoots. I knew the drill. But every time I thought about the lens turning toward me, my stomach did a slow, sickening roll. When my phone finally buzzed at 4 p.m., the screen lit up with Aria Vance. I stared at it for 3 rings, my hand hovering, before I picked it up. Hello? My voice sounded thin in the quiet apartment. Claire, just my name. No greeting, no preamble, but the tone was different. Usually when Aria called on a Saturday, there was background noise. City traffic, the espresso machine, the rustle of papers. Her voice would be clipped, running through a checklist of logistics. Today, the line was dead silent. Her voice was lower, stripped of its usual administrative armor. It sounded like she was lying down or sitting in a very quiet room, holding the phone close to her mouth. I'm here, I said, leaning against my kitchen counter, gripping the edge of the laminate until my knuckles turned white. I've been thinking about the light, she said. For tomorrow. I can bring the gels, I offered automatically, falling back into my role. We have the CTOs in the storage locker, and if we need the softbox— Stop, she interrupted, softly. It wasn't a reprimand, it was a restraint. I don't need the assistant right now. I need you to stop working. I closed my mouth, the silence stretching between us over the digital connection. I don't want you to prepare, she continued, her voice moving slow like honey, thick and deliberate. I don't want you to practice expressions in the mirror. I don't want you to think about your angles. If you come in there trying to give me a good side, I will send you home. Then what do you want? I asked. The question felt dangerous, like stepping off a ledge. I want the person I saw yesterday, she answered. I want the exhaustion. I want the hiding. I want the girl who moved here from nowhere and thinks she's fooling everyone with her black jeans and her clipboard. I see you, Claire. I see how hard you work to be invisible. That effort, that tension, that is what I want to capture. My breath hitched. Hearing her describe my internal landscape with such casual precision was terrifying. She wasn't just talking about photography. She was talking about me. She was peeling back the layers of professional lacquer I'd spent 2 years applying. What should I wear? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed practical instructions. No armor, she said immediately. No blazers, no stiff collars, nothing that structures you. Bring the things you wear when you're alone. Soft cottons, the things that have been washed 100 times. I want textures that breathe. She paused, and I could hear her inhale on the other end of the line. And I want to see skin, she added. Not in a fashion way. I need access to your neck, your collarbones, your arms, the places where your pulse shows. I want to see the mechanics of your breathing. So wear something loose, something that can slip off a shoulder without you thinking about it. I looked down at the oversized t-shirt I was wearing, suddenly hyper-aware of the fabric touching my skin. The intimacy of her request made my face flush hot. It wasn't sexual, exactly. It was invasive in a way that felt more profound. She was asking for access to my vulnerability. Okay, I managed to say. Simple. No armor. And Claire, yes? Don't hide from me tomorrow. If you're scared, be scared. If you want to run, let me see you want to run. Just stay. I'll stay, I promised. The line clicked dead. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling slightly. The apartment felt different now. The safety of my solitude had been breached. I realized then that I wasn't just agreeing to a portrait session. I was agreeing to a surrender. I was giving the most demanding, observant woman I knew permission to document the parts of myself I usually kept locked in the dark. I spent the rest of the night staring at my wardrobe, touching fabrics with trembling fingers, trying to find clothes that felt like the truth. When I finally drove to the studio on Sunday morning, the city was empty and gray. But inside the car, the air felt charged, heavy with the inevitability of what was about to happen. I wasn't driving to work. I was driving toward the edge of a cliff I had agreed to jump from. The freight elevator ride up to the 4th floor felt longer than usual. The metal cage rattled and groaned, a mechanical complaint that echoed in the empty shaft. On a weekday, this building is a hive of activity. Stylists dragging garment bags, set builders hauling lumber, the constant, frantic energy of creation. But on a Sunday morning, it was a tomb. The silence wasn't just an absence of noise, it was a physical weight. It pressed against my eardrums. When the doors finally shuttered open, the hallway was dim, illuminated only by the gray, watery light filtering through the dirty industrial windows at the far end. I walked to the heavy steel door of Studio B. I had my key. I always had my key. But for the first time in 2 years, I hesitated to use it. I wasn't opening the shop. I wasn't here to turn on the coffee machine and check the call sheet. I was the call sheet. The metal of the key felt cold and foreign in my hand, like I was breaking into a place I no longer belonged to. I took a breath, the air tasting of old brick and damp city dust, and turned the lock. The door swung open with a heavy thud, and the scale of the space hit me instantly. You forget how big a studio is when it's full of people, when it's crowded with racks of clothes, catering tables, monitors, and a crew of 15 people. It feels manageable. Empty? It felt like a cathedral. The white cyclorama at the back wall was a blinding, curved void, stretching floor to ceiling, an infinite white mouth waiting to swallow anything placed inside it. The air inside was cooler than the hallway, smelling faintly of the hot dust that burns off modeling lamps, and the sharp chemical tang of gripping rubber. It was the smell of my livelihood, but today it made my stomach turn over. Arya was already there. She was in the center of the room, wrestling with a heavy C-stand. Usually, she never touches the grip equipment. That's my job, or the digital tech's job. Arya directs. She doesn't lift. But there she was, wearing black denim and a simple charcoal tank top that showed the definition of her shoulders, hauling a 40-pound steel stand with a kind of terrifying, casual efficiency. She moved with a kinetic geometry, all sharp angles and deliberate force. I watched her for a moment before she saw me. It was disorienting to see the boss doing the grunt work. It stripped away the layer of hierarchy that usually protected me. There was no crew to buffer us, no makeup artist to gossip with, no stylist to fuss over hemlines, just the vast, echoing concrete box, the hum of the power packs she had already switched on, and her. I stepped fully inside, the door clicking shut behind me. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Arya stopped. She didn't startle, she just arrested her movement, one hand gripping the chrome riser of the stand. She turned slowly. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, messy knot, loose strands falling around her face. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright, burning with that specific, high-voltage focus that usually signaled a difficult shoot. "You're here," she said. Her voice didn't echo, but it carried. It was low, stripped of the professional polish she wore like armor during the week. "I'm here," I replied, my voice sounding small. Instinct took over. My body wanted to work. I took a step forward, dropping my bag. "Let me get that. You shouldn't be moving the heavy stands without gloves. The knurling tears up your hands." I reached for the stand, my hand moving to intercept hers. "Don't," she said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command, absolute and final. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the metal. "You are not the assistant today, Claire," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "You don't touch the equipment. You don't check the lights. You don't worry about the cables." She tightened the knuckle on the stand with a sharp twist of her wrist, her forearm muscles flexing with the effort. I stared at the movement, mesmerizing and intimidating. "Then what do I do?" I asked, feeling a sudden, desperate uselessness. My hands felt heavy and awkward at my sides. I was so used to holding things, tape, meters, coffees, lenses. That emptiness felt like exposure. "You exist," Arya said, walking past me to the equipment cart. She moved into my personal space, close enough that I could feel the displacement of the air, the faint warmth radiating from her body. "You occupy the space. That is the only thing I need you to do." She picked up a light meter, the familiar black device looking small in her hand. She wasn't looking at me now. She was looking at the light falling across the floor, calculating, assessing. But I felt her awareness of me like a physical touch. "It's just us," I said, the reality finally settling into the marrow of my bones. "No crew." "No crew," she confirmed, turning back to face me. The studio felt suddenly smaller, the vast white walls shrinking in until the world consisted only of the two of us and the charged, silent air between us. Just the subject and the observer. "Put your bag down, Claire. Stop trying to be useful." I set my bag on the floor. I uncrossed my arms. I stood there, in the middle of the cold concrete floor, and let the silence wash over me. I watched her move back to the lights, adjusting a barn door with a precise, metallic clack. I realized then that I wasn't just watching my boss work. I was watching a predator build a trap. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to step into it. "Go change," Arya said, gesturing toward the dressing alcove with her chin. "Leave your phone, leave your watch, leave everything that tells time." The dressing area is usually a chaotic ecosystem of hairspray clouds, discarded hangers, and half-drunk iced coffees. It's a space of frantic transformation, where I usually stand by with a steamer, smoothing out wrinkles on garments that cost more than my car. Walking into it alone, with the lights dimmed and the mirrors reflecting only empty chairs, felt like trespassing. I was invading the sanctuary of the beautiful people. I set my bag on the makeup counter. The surface was cold, dusted with the glittering residue of 1,000 previous shoots. I looked at the clothes I had brought. They were a pathetic little pile compared to the couture that usually lived here. A faded gray tank top with a stretched neckline, An oversized white button-down shirt I'd stolen from an ex-boyfriend 3 years ago and worn until the cotton was paper-thin. A pair of heavy, soft wool socks. My hands shook as I unbuttoned my jeans. Taking off my set blacks, the dark, nondescript uniform of the invisible assistant, felt like peeling off a layer of skin. That black denim was my shield. It said, I am working. It said, I am not to be looked at. Without it, standing there in the quiet alcove in my underwear, I felt terrifyingly human. I pulled on the oversized white shirt. It was soft, worn down by countless wash cycles, smelling faintly of my lavender laundry detergent, a scent that belonged to my private life, not this industrial space. I left the top 3 buttons undone, just as Arya had asked. The fabric hung loose, slipping off one shoulder, exposing the sharp line of my collarbone and the pale skin of my upper chest. It covered everything, yet I felt more naked than if I were standing there bare. The shirt didn't structure me. It draped over me, hiding nothing of my posture, my tension, or my trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the erratic rhythm of my heart, and stepped out from behind the partition. Arya was waiting. She had moved a stool near the edge of the set and was sitting there, watching the dressing room entrance. When I emerged, her eyes snapped to me instantly. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just absorbed. Her gaze started at my bare feet, traveled up the expanse of the white cotton shirt, lingered on the exposed slope of my shoulder, and finally met my eyes. "Come here," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the studio, it carried the weight of a shout. I walked toward her. The concrete floor was cold against my soles, a grounding sensation that did nothing to stop the room from spinning slightly. I stopped 3 feet away, my arms hanging uselessly at my sides. I wanted to cross them. I wanted to hunch my shoulders. I fought the urge to pull the shirt up, to button it closed, to hide. Arya stood up. She moved into my space with that fluid, predatory grace, closing the distance until I could count the flecks of gray in her irises. She smelled of ozone and expensive coffee. She reached out, her hand moving toward my neck. I flinched. A tiny, microscopic jerk of my head. Arya froze. She didn't pull back. "Don't," she murmured. "Don't anticipate me." She brought her hand closer. She didn't touch me, not really. Her fingers hovered a millimeter above the skin of my exposed shoulder, tracing the line of the clavicle without making contact. The heat radiating from her palm was intense, a phantom touch that sent a shockwave of goosebumps racing down my arm. My breath hitched in my throat, a sharp, audible intake of air. "You're holding your breath," she observed, her eyes tracking the tension in my neck muscles. "You're trying to freeze time. Stop it." Her hand moved up, hovering near my jaw. "Breathe, Claire. If you pass out, I have to fill out paperwork." It was a joke, dry and dark, but her eyes were deadly serious. She waited. She held her hand there, in that charged magnetic field between us, until I forced my lungs to expand. I let out a shaky exhale, my shoulders dropping an inch. "There," she said softly. "That's the person I want. The one who is terrified, but standing here anyway." She reached out and hooked one finger under the collar of the shirt, pulling it just slightly to the left, widening the opening. The back of her knuckles brushed against my skin, a fleeting, accidental contact that felt like a lightning strike. I shivered, a visible tremor that ran through my entire frame. Arya didn't pull away. She watched the shiver. She watched the way my pulse jumped in the hollow of my throat. She nodded, once, satisfied. "Look in the mirror," she commanded, pointing to the full-length glass propped against the wall. I turned my head. I saw myself, but it wasn't the reflection I was used to. I saw a woman in a softly glowing white shirt, hair messy, eyes wide and dark with adrenaline. I saw the vulnerability Arya was hunting for. I looked small, but electric. I looked like someone on the verge of something, a breakdown or a breakthrough. "Do you see her?" Arya asked, her voice right beside my ear. "That isn't my assistant. That is my subject." She stepped back, the heat of her presence withdrawing, leaving my skin cold and yearning for the proximity. "Let's go," she said, turning toward the dark, waiting expanse of the set. The light is waiting. Walking from the concrete floor onto the white, seamless paper is a sensory shift that always jars me. The concrete is hard, unforgiving, industrial. The paper is soft, yielding slightly under the weight of your feet. It creates a muffled, hushed sound, like stepping into fresh snow. I walked to the center of the set, to the piece of tape I had placed on the floor 1,000 times for other people. X marks the spot, the kill zone. As soon as I hit the mark, the lights hit me. We weren't using strobes yet, just the modeling lamps, the continuous tungsten bulbs that let the photographer preview the shadows. But even at half power, they were intense. The warmth was immediate, a physical pressure against my skin that felt like standing in direct equatorial sunlight. It was blinding. The rest of the room fell away into deep, impenetrable shadow. I couldn't see the walls anymore. I couldn't see the door. I was floating in a void of pure, white-hot illumination. I squinted, trying to find Arya in the darkness beyond the lights. "Don't squint," her voice came from the shadows. "Let your eyes adjust. Let the light in." She emerged from the dark, stepping into the circle of illumination with me. She held her light meter, a Sapphic L858, the one I had calibrated for her last month, like a talisman. This was the part of the process I had watched 1,000 times, the technical ritual, the measurement of photons. But watching it from the dark corner of the studio is one thing. Having it advanced upon you is another. Arya moved into my personal space with a terrifying lack of hesitation. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. The camera gives her a license to invade, to breach boundaries that would be socially unacceptable anywhere else. She stopped inches from me, the white dome of the light meter hovering near my cheek. "Chin up," she commanded. It was a soft order, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. I obeyed instantly. I tipped my head back, exposing the entire length of my throat to her, to the light, to the room. It is a posture of submission. It is the way an animal bares its neck to a predator to show it isn't a threat. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure she could see the fabric of the white shirt jumping with every beat. "Hold," she murmured. She brought the meter closer. She was so close now that I could feel the warmth of her body radiating against mine, competing with the heat of the lamps. She reached out with her free hand, the one not holding the meter, and used 2 fingers to gently tilt my face toward the main light. Her fingertips were cool, a shocking contrast to the hot air of the set. They burned against my jawline. She wasn't looking at my eyes. She was looking at the way the shadow fell across my nose, the gradient of light rolling off my cheekbone. I was a landscape to her. I was topography. She was studying the elevation of my features with a clinical, detached intimacy that made my knees weak. "Breathing again," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the shadow under my jaw. "You're holding it. I can see the tension in your sternum." I forced an exhale. It came out shaky, a ragged sound in the dead silence of the room. There was no music. Usually we blast playlist number 4, high energy shoots, to keep the mood up. Today, there was only the low electrical hum of the power packs and the sound of my own erratic respiration. The silence magnified everything. It turned the studio into a vacuum where the only things that existed were her gaze and my reaction to it. She pressed the button on the meter. Pop! The strobe fired, a test flash. For a split second, the world went completely white, followed by a dancing purple afterimage burned into my retinas. I blinked rapidly, disoriented. "Perfect," Arya said, checking the digital readout on the meter. F8, deep focus. Nowhere to hide. She lowered the meter, but didn't step back. She stayed in my orbit, staring at me. She wasn't looking at the light anymore. She was looking at the catch lights, the tiny reflections of the softbox in my eyes. She was checking to see if the soul was visible yet. "You know what I'm doing, don't you?" she asked, her voice low, intimate. "You're checking the ratios," I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "No," she corrected, her gaze dropping to my lips before snapping back to my eyes. "I'm wrapping the light around you. I'm building a cage out of photons so you can't escape." She reached out and adjusted the collar of my shirt again, opening it just a fraction more. Her knuckles grazed the skin of my chest, and the air in the room seemed to ignite. This wasn't just technical. It was possessive. She was sculpting me. She was arranging me like a still life, but I wasn't fruit in a bowl. I was a living, breathing woman who had been in love with her from the shadows for 2 years. "Okay," she said, finally stepping back, retreating into the darkness beyond the lights. The loss of her proximity was a physical ache. "Don't move. Don't fix your hair. Don't pose. Just stand there and let me look at you." I heard the heavy, mechanical sound of the camera stand rolling into position. I heard the lock engage. I heard the sharp intake of her breath as she looked through the viewfinder. I was no longer the assistant. I was the specimen. And the glass slide was about to be slipped under the microscope. The first shutter click didn't sound like a machine. It sounded like a guillotine blade dropping in a library. Clack, whir. It sliced through the heavy, heated silence of the studio, severing the last tether I had to my comfort zone. Then came the flash. Even with my eyes open, anticipating it, the burst of light was a physical shock. It washed over me, a tidal wave of white that left me blinking, disoriented, feeling the afterimage burned into my vision like a scar. "Don't blink," Arya's voice came from the darkness behind the tripod. It wasn't a request. "Blinking is hiding. Stay with me." Clack, whir. I tried to do what I had seen the models do 1,000 times. I tried to project. I tilted my chin down slightly, narrowing my eyes, trying to summon some kind of fierce, mysterious intensity. I stiffened my spine, arching my back just enough to catch the light, turning my good side toward the lens. I was mimicking the architecture of confidence I had studied from the sidelines for 2 years. I was putting on the mask. "Stop," Arya said. The word was sharp, like a slap. The shutter stopped. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. "What are you doing?" she asked. She stepped out from behind the camera, moving into the pool of light. She looked annoyed, not angry, but disappointed, which was infinitely worse. "You're giving me blue steel. You're giving me a magazine cover. I can hire a 19-year-old from an agency if I want that." "I don't know what else to do," I confessed, my voice cracking under the pressure. "I'm trying to give you a good picture." "I don't want a good picture," she said, stepping closer, invading my space again. "I want a true one. Drop your shoulders, unclench your jaw. Stop trying to look beautiful and just start trying to be." She reached out and physically pushed my shoulders down. Her touch was firm, clinical, yet electric. She knocked the posture right out of me, leaving me slumping slightly, feeling exposed and unformed. "There," she whispered, stepping back. "The exhaustion, the fear. Give me that." She went back to the camera. Clack, whir. It is incredibly difficult to do nothing, to just stand there, under 10,000 watts of light, with a lens the size of a dinner plate staring at you, and just exist. Every instinct in my body screamed to perform, to smile, to fix my hair, to present a polished surface. Arya stripped it all away. Every time I tried to pose, she stopped shooting. Every time I tried to hide my hands or smooth my shirt, she commanded me to stop. "Let the shirt hang," she ordered. "Let it fall off the shoulder. Stop fixing it. The mess is the point." My body began to betray me. The adrenaline that had been holding me up started to curdle into a shaky, vibrating fatigue. My hands, hanging by my sides, began to tremble. It started in my fingers, a subtle twitching, but soon my whole hand was shaking. I tried to make a fist to stop it, to clench my fingers into my palm so she wouldn't see the weakness. "Open your hands," Arya commanded. She had seen it. She saw everything. "They're shaking," I whispered, humiliated. "I know," she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming a velvet rope pulling me in. "Bring them up. Put them on your neck. Let them shake against your skin." I hesitated. It felt too raw. "Do it, Claire." I raised my trembling hands, pressing them against my own throat, feeling the erratic pulse jumping beneath my fingertips. I looked into the lens, terrified that she was seeing me fall apart. Clack whir, clack whir, clack whir. She was shooting faster now. The rhythm accelerated. She wasn't just taking photos. She was having a conversation with me, using the camera as the medium. "Tell me about the town," she said suddenly, her eye still pressed to the viewfinder. "What?" I blinked, thrown off balance. "The town you left. The grain silo. Tell me about it." "It was small," I stammered. "Suffocating." "Why did you leave?" Click. "I couldn't breathe there." "Why?" Click. "What were you hiding from them?" The question hit me in the chest. I wasn't hiding. "Liar," Arya said softly. Click. "You're hiding right now. You're hiding from me. What didn't you want them to see?" My breath hitched. The heat of the lights felt like it was melting my skin. I didn't want them to see that I wanted more. More what? Click. "More money? More fame?" "No," I choked out, tears of frustration pricking my eyes. "Just to be seen, to be known." "Like this?" she asked. The camera lowered slightly. Her dark eyes locked onto mine over the barrel of the lens. "Is this what you wanted?" I looked at her, my hands shaking against my throat, my heart laid bare in the white, hot room. "Yes," I whispered. Clack whir. "Good," she murmured. "Stay in that feeling. Don't you dare look away." Time lost its structure. I don't know if we had been shooting for 20 minutes or 2 hours. The only measure of time was the rhythmic, blinding pulse of the strobe. The studio had become a kiln, the heat from the modeling lamps pressing the oversized cotton shirt against my skin. I was exhausted, a vibrating, wire-taut fatigue that stripped away every defense mechanism I had left. Arya was relentless. She moved around the set like a storm front, never satisfied, always hunting. She changed lenses, switching from the portrait 85mm to a wider 35, forcing her to physically step closer to me. She was so close now that the front element of the lens was invading my personal space, violating the social contract of distance. I could hear her breathing, a ragged counterpoint to my own. She was sweating too, a faint sheen on her forehead, strands of hair escaping her severe knot. We were locked in this together, a dual orbit of exertion. "You're drifting," she snapped, not looking up from the viewfinder. "You're thinking about the pose again. Stop it." "I'm tired, Arya," I confessed, the words scraping out of my dry throat. "I don't have anything left." "Yes, you do," she countered, her voice dropping to that dangerous, intimate register. "You have everything left. You've just spent 2 years burying it under coffee runs and cable management. Dig it up. Give it to me." She lowered the camera for a second, her eyes locking onto mine. They were dark, dilated, ferocious. You think you don't belong in this room, don't you? You think you're just the girl from the cornfields who got lucky. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. It was the exact fear that kept me awake at 3 a.m. The imposter syndrome that I wore like a second skin. I do my job, I whispered, defensive, my eyes stinging. That's not what I asked, she pushed, stepping closer. The lens came up again. Click. You walk around this city like you're apologizing for taking up space. You walk around this studio like you're terrified someone is going to ask to see your ticket. Click. Click. I'm not, I lied. Liar, she hissed softly. The shutter fired rapidly now. You're terrified that if I really look at you, if I stop looking at the lighting ratios and really look at you, I'll see that you're just a small-town girl playing dress-up. My breath hitched. The tears were right there, hot and humiliating, pressing against the back of my eyes. I fought them. I clenched my jaw. I tried to look away, to break the connection, but the lens was a black hole pulling me in. Don't you dare look away, Arya commanded. Look at me. Who are you doing this for, Claire? Why do you stay here? Why do you put up with my demands, the hours, the madness? Is it for the paycheck? No, I choked out. Then why? She was shouting now, or maybe she was whispering, and the silence made it sound like shouting. Why are you still here? The answer rose up in me, undeniable and terrifying. It wasn't about the art. It wasn't about the career. It was about the way her hands looked when she adjusted a light. It was about the rare, fleeting moments when she smiled at something I said. It was about her. It had always been about her. I looked at her. I stopped trying to be the assistant. I stopped trying to be the model. I let the wall crumble. I let the longing I had been suppressing for 700 days flood into my face. I looked at her with the raw, naked hunger of someone who has been starving in the presence of a feast. Because I can't leave you, I whispered. The words were barely audible, but in the vacuum of the room, they landed like stones. Arya didn't speak. She didn't breathe. She just pressed the shutter. Clack, 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 clack. The motor drive screamed. The strobe fired 4 times in rapid succession, a blinding staccato of light that captured the exact moment my heart broke open. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I let her take it. I let her take the grief, the love, the fear, the absolute devastation of being seen. And then, silence. The echo of the shutter died away. The whine of the capacitors recharging was the only sound in the universe. Arya lowered the camera. She didn't check the screen. She didn't look at the histogram. She slowly lowered the heavy body of the camera until it rested against her chest, the strap pulling tight against her neck. Her hands were shaking. I saw them. The great Arya Vance, whose hands were as steady as a surgeon's, was trembling. She met my gaze across the short distance. The barrier of the lens was gone, leaving only thick, charged electric air. The look on her face wasn't professional satisfaction. It wasn't the look of a photographer who just got the shot. It was the look of a woman who had just opened a door, expecting an empty room, and found a fire raging inside. Her lips were parted slightly, her breath coming fast. She looked at my messy hair, my exposed collarbone, the single tear that had finally escaped and was tracking a hot line down my cheek. She didn't look at me like a subject. She looked at me like I was the only source of gravity in the room. The dynamic shifted. The tectonic plates of our relationship groaned and realigned. I wasn't the employee anymore. I wasn't the subordinate. I was the muse. I was the catalyst. And for the first time, I realized that the electricity I felt wasn't one-sided. She wasn't just capturing my desire. She was mirroring it. Claire, she breathed. It wasn't a command, it was a realization. She took a step toward me, leaving the camera behind on the cart, abandoning the tool that had always been her shield. She walked onto the white paper, ignoring the footprints, ignoring the lighting setup. She stopped inches from me. The heat coming off her was overwhelming. "I got it," she said, her voice rough, unpolished. "We're done. We have to stop." But she didn't move away. She stayed right there, in my breathing space, staring at me, as if she had never seen me before. Or perhaps, as if she was finally seeing me for the first time. The shoot was over, but something else, something dangerous and inevitable, had just begun. The orange tether cable snaked across the concrete floor like a lifeline connecting the camera to the digital station. Arya walked to the monitors, her movements slower now, the frantic energy of the shoot replaced by a quiet, heavy gravity. I followed, pulling the oversized shirt tighter around my chest. The heat of the lights was fading, and the studio felt vast and cold again. But the space between us was still vibrating. On the screen, the raw file rendered. I stopped breathing. The woman on the monitor wasn't the invisible assistant who made coffee and hid in the corners. She was raw. She was fierce. The lighting Arya had built wasn't just technical. It was a caress. It wrapped around the curve of my neck and highlighted the tear tracking through the texture of my skin. It was the most beautiful, terrifying thing I had ever seen, because it was undeniable proof that Arya saw me. Not as a problem to solve or a variable to control, but as something precious. The catchlights in the eyes weren't just reflections of the softbox. They were reflections of the woman standing behind it. "I've spent a decade building walls out of light," Arya said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the hard drives. She didn't look at me. She traced the edge of the monitor with a trembling finger. "I use perfectionism as a shield. If the image is perfect, nobody asks about the photographer. Nobody sees that I'm hiding." She turned then, the blue light of the screen casting half her face in shadow. "I've never let anyone see me lose control, Claire. Until today." "You didn't lose control," I whispered, stepping closer to the glow of the desk. "I did," she countered, and her eyes dropped to my lips before snapping back up. I stopped directing and started feeling. That wasn't part of the plan. The joke, that defensive, sarcastic comment I'd made on Friday about stepping in front of the lens, had transformed into a confession. The safety of our professional distance had been exposed for what it was, a lie we told ourselves to survive the proximity. "So, what happens to the assistant?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Arya reached out, her hand hovering near my face again. But this time, she didn't stop. She brushed her thumb against my cheekbone, wiping away the ghost of the tear she had just photographed. The touch was electric, grounding, and possessive. It wasn't the touch of a boss correcting a subordinate. It was an answer. "She's gone," Arya said softly. "I can't pretend you're just part of the background anymore. You're the focal point. And I think I'm done with deep focus. I only want to look at you." The implication hung there, thrilling and terrifying. Monday morning wouldn't be about coffee orders and call sheets. The architecture had collapsed, and we were standing in the dust, staring at each other. We walked out into the cool night air, the city hum sounding distant and irrelevant. The heavy steel door of the studio clicked shut behind us, leaving the safety of the dark corners behind. I wasn't the small-town transplant anymore. I was the muse who had forced the perfectionist to drop her guard. The distance was gone. If you want to see how we navigate the wreckage of the walls we just tore down, subscribe to follow the rest of the story.